Hundreds of thousands of researchers around the world are working to improve life and address imminent threats to humanity. Often their research ends up in the scientific valley of death in the form of publications and patents that never see the light of day. That is about to change. Welcome to the Lab to Startup podcast, hosted by Naresh Sunkara, founder and executive director of the Berkeley Postdoc Entrepreneurship program at the University of California, Berkeley. This show has two main goals: share the stories of those who have successfully founded startups based on their own research, and highlight resources needed to help those aspiring to launch startups in the deep tech space. Whether it's electric cars, vaccines, addressing climate change concerns, or possibly establishing life on other planets, Naresh and his esteemed guests want to help scientists, engineers, faculty, and researchers bring their innovations to market. Learn more and subscribe today at labtostartup.com. And now, here's Naresh.
My guests today are Professors Amy Herr and Regis Kelly. Amy is the Executive Director of the Bakar Bioenginuity Hub, the topic for today's conversation. Amy is the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Professor in the Department of Bioengineering at UC Berkeley. She is also the Faculty Director for the Baker Fellows Program and a Chan Zuckerberg BioHub investigator. For the sake of brevity, I'll be addressing Bakar Bioenginuity Hub as BBH. Amy is overseeing the BBH program in its entirety and playing a key role in strategy and development of the campus programs. As a startup co-founder of two companies, she knows what's critical to develop and support entrepreneurs on campus. I had the pleasure of working with Amy over the years, and she has an infectious energy that will inspire everyone to work on bigger problems very efficiently. And Reg Kelly is the director of Baker Labs at BBH and executive director of QB3 Institute, created by the California legislature to strengthen the academic foundation of its technology-based industries. QB3 is devoted exclusively to biology and to the life sciences industries. Reg previously served as the executive vice chancellor at the University of California in San Francisco, where his major responsibility was the new Mission Bay campus. He also served as chair of the Department of Biochemistry and Chemistry, the director of Hormone Research Institute, amongst other roles that he played during his long and celebrated tenure. While Reg has won many awards, one of the coolest, in my opinion, is the one from Queen Elizabeth II, who gave the title Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire for his services to science, innovation, and global health. I'm very fortunate to be talking to him. And by no means are these introductions complete bios for either Amy or Reg. You can find more in the show notes. In this episode of Lab to Startup, we will learn about BBH and Baker Labs, where researchers from around the world are welcome to build solutions for the most pressing global challenges, ranging from human health to environmental sustainability. They will be using discoveries at the convergence of the life sciences with the physical, engineering, and data sciences. We'll talk about the idea behind BBH, the hurdles they had to jump as an academic institution to establish a startup incubator on campus, the programming and infrastructure that will be made available to the startups, and how they will be deploying patient capital and resources. We will also learn about the partnerships they are building, both internally and externally, to support researchers solving big problems here. This magnum opus project, developed at a historic art museum at UC Berkeley, could potentially be a model for other universities trying to move academic research out of the labs to solve world problems more actively. I'm excited about the possibilities and hope you enjoy this conversation. Amy, Reg, welcome to the show. It is an absolute honor to have you both here today to learn about the Bakar Bioenginuity Hub and Baker Labs. Amy, let us set the stage for the audience by introducing what Bakar Bioenginuity Hub is about. Maybe you can break down the name itself.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks also for inviting us to join you. And I have to say that Reg, when I met him for the first time, starting as an assistant professor at Berkeley in 2007, I distinctly remember a conversation. He was kind enough to come over to my office in Stanley Hall. I think we were still just setting up my lab, and make sure that I knew about all of the resources that QB3 was introducing to UC Berkeley, UCSF, and also UC Santa Cruz. And that was just an exceptionally warm way to be welcomed to the Cal community, the UC community. It also really opened my eyes to some of the impact that academic researchers can have through translation of their ideas out into the world, especially through commercialization. There's another point I'll make on that later around the impact that we can have as PIs with training and preparing our graduates, both postdocs, PhD students, and undergraduates as well, to be real leaders in this important space of innovation. But Naresh, back to your question. So the Bakar Bioenginuity Hub is designed to really accelerate the translation of discoveries and innovations that are happening in our academic research labs out into the world for positive societal good. At the end of the day, that's absolutely what we're focused on. We don't want to have important solutions sitting in the repository of knowledge, these peer-reviewed papers that we know are so important to capturing what we're learning as we do our research. In some cases, we know we need to help accelerate those reduction to practice and get them out into the world to tackle the big problems. And that's what BBH, I'll call it, the Bakar Bioenginuity Hub, is all about, is really this acceleration. In particular, it's about acceleration of these discoveries and innovations in these hard science existential problems that are facing humanity. So for us, because of the phenomenal resources that have been brought to reality now in Bakar Labs, we are focused on making that impact in this so-called bioconvergent space. So it's where the life sciences just run right up against the physical, including chemistry, engineering, and data sciences. And that's part of the name. So bioingenuity, we call it, that bio component, life sciences component, the ingenuity part, which is around engineering or physical sciences. And then, of course, it harkens to ingenuity as well in terms of discovery. That's one component. Hub, we call it a hub because, as you know, and I hope your listeners also know, as I mentioned in the comments I made just a moment ago, UC and UC Berkeley have just a phenomenal ecosystem, I think we call it, around entrepreneurship. We can always do better. And Naresh, you've worked hard to help mature us and evolve us to make it even better than it is now. That's what we aim to do here. But critical and kind of a root of the name, as you're asking about, is around being a hub for the resources and communities on campus. So to have a wonderful place for people to either meet in a deterministic way, you have a meeting set up and you want to go somewhere and talk to someone about entrepreneurship in this space, or you're just rubbing shoulders outside at our beautiful pavilion or inside in the cafeteria, for example. So that, I hope, answers your question.
Thank you so much. And that is the goal of this podcast as well. We want to tell the stories of how technologies are moving out of the lab, because the stories in the initial stages are not told. We talk about successes and then we talk about the resources. How do you do it? And I think BBH is a great resource. On that note, Reg, can you tell us about Bakar Labs? What is it about and what makes this world-class and how is it different from other incubators?
It's a very good question. One should say there are many life sciences incubators around in the Bay Area right now. It's in big demand for them. What is so special about the Bakar Labs one, I think, is what you want to ask. Well, the others are largely all either from the category of being commercial, like supported by Alexandria, or they're actually strategic. They're ones set up by a company like Illumina will hold its incubator to try and get its technology into those things. They both have commercially focused incubators. What the Bakar Labs is an incubator on university campus run by university people, and it's a not-for-profit, and it's there to try and push the idea of entrepreneurship for the public good. It's not there primarily to make a profit. It's there because we believe that this is a way to help society. So that makes it different. The other thing which makes it really tremendously advantageous for our tenants is, of course, it's on the Berkeley campus. And who doesn't want to be on the Berkeley campus? That's an amazingly prestigious place. But it means also they have close access to Berkeley equipment, because they get really sophisticated equipment funded largely by NIH and others, which can be accessed on a research base. And also, there is an incredible base of scientific talent there. If someone comes up, for example, as in a company that's working on gene therapy, there's all sorts of people who are experts on gene therapy on the campus that they can contact and take advantage of that. So it makes it a climate, as far as I can tell, an environment quite unlike a non-academic incubator. So it's a quite unique experiment. Of course, because I think there's not many other people doing exactly what the Bakar Labs are doing, we don't have a precedent. So we're feeling our ways as we go along. We have a lot to learn, but we think the concept is wonderful. And so far, it's working out really well.
Before we take a deep dive, if you could sort of paint a picture for us of what the deep tech incubation looked like at UC Berkeley and at the state level, relative to maybe when you first got involved in the space, both of you, then going to the need for creation of BBH, in your opinion, what the future might look like, so that the audience might appreciate the change that is happening and the state of deep tech startups today.
A lot of my involvement in this came out when I was Executive Vice Chancellor at UCSF. It came out with two things. One, the students would come to me and say, less than half of us are going to get academic jobs. And so we're going to have to go into working in the private sector, but you treat us almost as pariahs. We're failures if we do that. And you don't encourage us to do that. And we don't train us to do this. And that really hurt, because when your students come and say, you're supposed to be an educational institution and you're not training us for the jobs that exist, and instead you're just so focused on academia as everything, and if you're not a professor, you're a failure, that hurt. Thinking about how we can help get them ready. I used to have to write these promotion letters for my faculty to get advances. And we had three categories: research, education, and public service. They were all fantastic at research and education. When it came to public service, it was always almost a nod and a wink and a pretend. There wasn't a general feeling that they were actually trying to do something for the public service. And I was asked to talk about this at a cellology meeting once, and I realized that we were really not fulfilling our social contract as academics. We thought we were entitled to get research money to support ourselves, but in fact, we weren't. We were getting money from NIH largely, and they were the NIH, which comes the taxpayers, and the taxpayers were not giving us the money to get fancy papers in Nature and Science. They hoped it would improve their health or that of their children. So there was an expectation on us from the public that we were there to help them. But in practice, it didn't exist. It was really a nod and a wink. So I actually felt guilty about this. So I quit my job as Vice Chancellor of Research and actually started QB3, which had no money, no staff, no building, nothing. But it was much more exciting because it was trying to do something I thought was a social need.
And what stage of your career was this when you left the job and started QB3?
When I retired from being Executive Vice Chancellor at UCSF, I'd actually hoped to go and sail my boat to the South Pacific. But I got distracted from that because an interesting reason. I realized it's really important for all of us to feel useful. And it was lovely to be on my boat, but I realized I was completely irrelevant to the world. I wasn't helping anybody, and that was hard. So I came back. So I came back from retirement to be head of QB3, and that was back in 2004.
Thank you for setting that timeline and the background. On to you, Amy.
Yeah, it's always really interesting to hear how we got to where we are today. So my perspective is very different, coming in and just really the power that UC Berkeley already has in terms of impact through entrepreneurship. That vibe, if you will, was definitely energized on the campus when I first set foot here in 2007. Maybe it's coming from engineering. I'm a bioengineer now, trained mechanical engineer, but most of our senior faculty and leadership really value and have valued translation through entrepreneurship. Industry partnerships are a huge part of the culture of the engineering, the College of Engineering at Berkeley, and have been for decades, as has been entrepreneurship. That vibe just reverberates all the way across our community. Undergraduates, graduate students, postdocs, faculty, senior leadership, as I mentioned before. So it was a real honor to join the campus and understand that this is something that large segments, not all, as Reg just pointed out, but large segments of the campus really value that impact. To where we are today, which is, if I can quote him, kind of paraphrase, our most recent Vice Chancellor for Research Emeritus, Randy Katz, really advocating for 4 pillars of responsibility and roles for faculty, including that teaching, that research, that service, and then innovation and entrepreneurship. So I don't think I'm outside bounds by paraphrasing him there. Also, having the chance to hear our Chancellor, Carol Christ, open up many university events by just really calling out how Berkeley is a powerhouse and has been. Pitch book, reputable, but just one metric, certainly indicators of entrepreneurial success. Rank us in certainly the top 3 across a broad range of metrics, everything from serial entrepreneurs, so these alumni and faculty that just can't get enough in terms of taking a risk and jumping out there to get their ideas and discoveries into positive impact on society, all the way to capital raised. I think we're number 2 in the most recent rankings for that. Certainly Forbes puts us in the top 2 or 3 startup universities. So there's just an energy and a commitment on this campus that, there are pockets that have been improving for sure in understanding. I think some of the points that Reg really importantly made, these are career paths for our trainees, our alumni trainees as well. I'll just tell you personally, from my perspective, being a faculty founder of a startup, having a couple of spin-outs from my lab, completing Series A or exiting, and then also even from the courses I teach, having spin-outs that have, I think now we've got 4 FDA-approved products from undergraduate courses that are used across the world, one of which is in over 400 hospitals right now. And seeing that, not just that energy and that intention, but also, as I mentioned earlier, resources that Berkeley and the UC system have built, everything from Skydeck to Citrus Foundry to these grassroots student organizations, Free Ventures, the House, and new organizations. As a matter of fact, I just met with yesterday 2 new student organizations at the PhD level and the undergrad level, focused on these bioconvergence areas that are starting up. And then, of course, the Berkeley Postdoc Entrepreneurship Program as well, BPAP. I hope that's a little bit of detail on, from my vantage point, hopping in maybe 15 years ago, that there's this huge swell of activity that's increasing.
I might just expand on what Amy said, because she made a very important point for me as well, and I think for all of us, that what has happened in the biological sciences, where the physical sciences are quite different. The physical sciences stratified so that there was a basic physics department or astrophysics. None of them actually interacted with industry, and very little entrepreneurial thing. But there was engineering, chemical engineering, electrical engineering, and the engineering departments had terrific relationships with that. And they have had a tradition for many years of being entrepreneurial. What was different in the life sciences, until recently, we were nothing like engineers. The life sciences haven't split into basic biology and applied biology in this way. What you have in the same community, if you have faculty members who are saying, why we're in biology is because of the beauty of biological principles and don't contaminate it with these things, and the people who want to have some practical application. So what I've always argued is what we're trying to do in biology and the life sciences is bring them up and catch up with the engineering without having this convenient stratification of departments that they have.
Thank you for setting that stage. Let's get into the details. I was going through the website, which talks about a world-class incubator space, patient capital, distinguished mentors, and vibrant founder communities. I'd like to double click on each of these topics. Amy, let's start with the origin of BBH and the space, and whose idea was it and how did it come to light?
Again, it's great that you have both Reg and I on here, because we'll have different vantage points, kind of where we popped into the project as well. So hopefully conveying kind of a complete story that your listeners might be interested in. So I hop in to this project. I had the huge honor of being a Baker faculty fellow in 2012. So the inaugural cohort. I don't know how it happened, but it really gave me a foray into this world of entrepreneurship, and honestly, just how this can change the lives of our trainees to be able to choose a career path, to forge their own way, and to know that there's champions and advocates for them on the faculty that are just as happy if they start their own company, if they join a huge company that's already out there making an impact, if they choose a national lab, they choose to go into academia or some completely different route, that we're here to help them achieve their dreams and also to make an impact on society. So hopping in through Baker Fellows Program, that really opened my eyes to this path and how transformative it can be, not just for our technologies and solutions and discoveries, but also for our people. So that was one element. I was super honored. Paul Alivisatos, our former Vice Chancellor for Research and Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost, invited me to take over the Baker Fellows Program. Never had a faculty director before, so I was happy to put my own spin on that, including really expanding that program to identify, recognize, and support the future C-suite of these spin-outs, which are the postdocs and grad students who are in the lab doing the work. Selfishly, we want to keep our faculty on this campus. Entrepreneurial leave, fine, you can take it, but come back. So your next great ideas and the great teams that you're assembling, stay the engine, the DNA of Berkeley. That's a little bit of inside motivation there for sure. But really trying to help connect this community of PhD students and postdocs who are doing this deep science research, this deep engineering research that underpins this whole area of bioconvergence. So that really allowed me to pilot how can we impact our future entrepreneurs who are trainees. Then there was a sea change for me that happened right around the time that this concept of, hey, can we repurpose this attractive nuisance of a former art gallery for a 21st century research university, which is accelerating that translation. So of course it makes sense to think about, is there a way to use these art galleries to use that as a convening place, again, for these either deterministic or stochastic interactions that happen that are so central to how we not only move science forward, but how we move startups and quite honestly, our careers forward. And that sea change for me was really a compelling argument that Paul made to me, which is, yeah, we can build an incubator. We've got the perfect partner to do it, QB3. We're going to do it. But this, because it's housed on the UC Berkeley campus, we have the potential to do something important, something uniquely Berkeley, and something that just dovetails and resonates with that incubator. And that is not just boosting and supporting those startups and those leaders today, but let's look to the future 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now. What are the technologies? What are the discoveries that we're going to need to launch those startups of 2035? And what are we going to need in terms of really preparing our trainees with not just the know-how scientifically and engineering wise, but also what do they need to know about business? What do they need to know about law? I mean, these are researchers. What do they need to know about that? And what do they need to know about forming networks of people, both accomplished and also their own peers, who can really help accelerate, again, these discoveries and innovations out to impact? I jumped in at the point where Paul and the team that had assembled were saying, let's have an incubator. Let's make it world-class with our partner QB3. And let's link to the campus and the UC educational and research system so that we can bring in resources to prepare that next generation, not the generation that's moving in today necessarily, although the incubator helps them quite a bit. Let's think about tomorrow and the day after. And at the bottom line, this all boils down to be maintaining and expanding UC Berkeley and the UC system's preeminence as a research university and system in the 21st century. I mean, it is an absolute no-brainer. That's how I got convinced.
Paul is awesome. Like, I had the honor of working with him around the same projects, I believe, and we had some great leadership. Randy Katz, he was the first one to bring internet to the White House, I believe, if I'm not wrong. But Reg, your take on the subject, on the origin story, and what do you have to add for that?
Amy and I have come to the same position from very different backgrounds, and that's what makes this an interesting event. The key thing with QB3 is actually it came from this California legislature. It wasn't dreamt up by the university, and it was made in order to help the California economy, and it was done by Governor Gray Davis in the year 2000, and they put $100 million into us to try and put up these labs on the 3 campuses where we could try and do the research that would lead. We're not just a research institute, we're a research and innovation institute. So we're doing research that leads to innovation, and innovation, of course, leads to practical solutions. So very different being that we're always being driven to have a state focus rather than a university focus on that. Now, when I started doing this, if you're going to do anything practical to benefit society, you've got to do it with the private sector. You know, universities don't make drugs or therapies. You've got to do that. My first direction was a mistake, actually. It didn't work. I went to all the CEOs of people I knew and saw Pfizer and J&J and so on, and said, could we actually partner together? Aren't we exciting? We're going to do this thing. And it didn't actually go very far. And the reason it didn't go very far is all these CEOs, when they look at universities, they see it's going to be 10 years or 15 years from any discovery in the university shows up on their bottom line. They're only going to be in the job for 5 years. So their focus was all, what's clinical trials, where research we were doing that would affect clinical trials, and we weren't doing that. So we had to look around and see what other things we might go there. And we realized that what is the best thing coming out of universities are the startups. It's a very easy transition from being in a university lab to running a poor startup with very little money and having to work fast on a short, small budget. But it turned out, of course, the big pharma, particularly where I work, they were most interested in acquiring the startups. So the nicest way to interact with the big pharmas was to work on startups. We were like parents of the same children, and getting life sciences startups gave us a way to talk to the big companies. So we started getting involved with startups. We had a little space, an incubator space in our new building, 2,500 square feet of space. So we got involved to try and see if there was any demand for, that was now a university-associated startup. We filled it up with 6 companies within 6 months. And within a year, some of them were leaving and getting with exits at 25 million. So we thought, here, maybe we should be thinking about starting a venture fund around those. That's where we started Mission Bay Capital, a venture fund associated with our incubator. But then the demand for our space was so large, and there was no space on the university that what we had at the time. So we then looked around to see if we can get space commercially. So we got space in the dog patch. There was no money from the university to do it, so we had to get it from limited partners and so on. But again, within a year, we had filled up that 20,000 square feet of space with over 40 companies. There was big demand to come in, and we were making about $1 million a year coming into this thing. So, wow. So when Janet Napolitano came to visit our incubator and saw it successful, she said, would I go work with her for a year? Actually turned up a year and a half, and see if we could develop these ideas of a university-associated venture fund and on-campus incubators across all 10 campuses and 3 national labs. So I spent some time doing that. And that was actually a fairly interesting, profitable time to do it. The concept that came out of that, and excuse me saying this but it fits in beautifully to the BBH, what I used to go and espouse at that time was saying, look, I've spent all my life in academic health centers, very strange academic things, straight universities with professors, graduation, all the paraphernalia of academia, but they work with a hospital, and the hospital is trying to feed the patients. They're not doing anything primarily for the students, they're for the patients. But it turns out it's great for the patients of academic health centers, and it's great for the students because they get experiences. By extrapolation, couldn't we have academic innovation centers where you take away the hospital, replace them with a big incubator, and then the students would get experience in the incubator? The dialogue, as Amy was saying, between the people doing entrepreneurship and the basic scientists would be facilitated by this. So I tried to espouse in academic health centers in my various talks and various groups. I didn't get anywhere. That was put on hold. But then the next thing that happened to me is Bob Lalane, who was the vice chancellor for real estate at Berkeley, came to me and said, we have this big building here. We can't do anything. It's very hard to tear down because it's an artistic heritage. We have no money to repair it, but you managed to take a building in the dog patch, get no money from the university, and turn it into making $1 million a year. Is there any way you could think of doing something like that here? So that's how I got into this, through the real estate part. And I had never done, so I had to think about bank loans and how I was going to get raised. We thought it was going to be about 10 million to do earthquake upgrade. And I was going to ask, how do you approach a bank to get loans? I didn't know how to do any of this. So I started talking about them, is how one gets bank loans to start doing an incubator. Now, where the two things came together is because of the Baker Fellows Program and working with Amy. And I didn't know much about that at the time. And our interest in trying to get the revenue generating place in a building that Berkeley had nothing to do with it, that converged in a way, and it came to the BBH. I was not involved, by the way, in the development and creation of the Bakar Bioenginuity Hub. I was always just involved with seeing if the space could be used as lab space for incubators. So I had a much narrower vision on this whole thing. But that's why now we come into QB3 trying to do something, yes, of course, for Berkeley and the UC system, but with a vision, can we do something for California and the world? So we're more focused on entrepreneurship for the public good, a more outwardly looking thing. But I think those two views of how the BBH and the incubator should go, they complement each other and they encourage us to think differently. So I think it's a very nice marriage of ideas.
I love the way these two stories came together and toward the same goal. I don't think one could have happened without the other, I believe. But thank you for sharing that story. And maybe, Amy, you can take on from that story where you identified the building. And how long did it take for you to complete from getting approvals? I'm asking this question to understand the challenges. I don't want to make it look like it's an easy process by any means. So imagine the audience is some other university or institution trying to build something similar. What can other universities learn from this experience of yours?
Sure. I encourage all of them to do it if it fits within their mission. Again, it's not hyperbole, in my view, to say a modern top tier research university in the 21st century is going to benefit in myriad ways from having a really well-resourced and well thought out pipeline, if you will, to both entrepreneurial success from the project standpoint and also the people standpoint. We were just so excited because the site is right next, I'm looking over there right now, to Berkeley Law. It's nearly proximal to Haas School of Business, just a short walk away from chemistry, engineering, molecular cell biology, and some of the other deep research units on the campus. So having this location, having the ability to house the incubator and these programs on the campus just integrates all that we're building in a way that naturally supports movement of people and ideas and efforts back and forth. Some real tangible examples that I'll give there is access to university core lab resources, mass spectrometry, NMR, sequencing, high content imaging. So if there's a startup and some founders that are working in Bakar Labs, thanks to the work of many people who are not on this podcast and led by the Vice Chancellor for Research's office, that vision, there is a way for those startups to access those cutting edge scientific resources that the startup itself, there's no way they're going to buy that instrumentation or maybe even have that expertise. But they, through paying, can access instrument time and knowledge time of some of the amazing staff that we have on the campus, while not interfering with access of academic labs. So those academic labs have priority. I see that expanding over time to support Bakar Labs and then also to support startups close by the Berkeley campus that can use those facilities and also benefit the campus by taking that latent downtime, making it into time that those core facilities can actually be bringing in revenue, which supports the training of the staff and new instrumentation as instrumentation typically evolves. You want to stay on the cutting edge with the tools that you offer. So that's one example. Another example, a very person-based example, is this ability to literally walk across Bancroft as a trainee on our campus and be at a location where you can have an internship. You can potentially have a work study appointment or a co-op appointment. No longer are you trying to figure out how to, move to San Jose for 3 months in the summer with a furnished or maybe unfurnished short-term lease, try to cobble together some roommates because that's a really expensive proposition. I've done it myself as a student to figure out how to get where you want to get for the summer so that you can do some cutting edge work and get paid for it, but not enough. So be able to have that access to these internships and really enrichment and discovery experiences right on the campus in an industry setting. Make some mentors, make some role models, form those connections, as well as getting that paid experience, well, without having to figure out some of these logistics. We're right here in the Bay Area, so being able to bring that literally onto our campus is a big part of it.
Fascinating story. The facilities, the core facilities you mentioned, I can vouch for it as a beneficiary, as a postdoc, and as a startup founder too. I used all the facilities, and this is something that most startups won't have. I think that is something people have to think about when they're creating a structure like this. This is all great. How does one get accepted to the program? If you're a startup, what is the process?
We have a website. You go and look on that and you just apply. They ask us a set of questions to make sure that your startup fits with the criteria that we want to have someone in. Like, you have to be incorporated. You have to have a little bit of cash, 6 months rent in pocket, and you can't come in with no money because you have to pay rent. So we put that list of requirements. And so far, we're having over 200 inquiries so far about the space. And of those, then we sort of triage them and choose the ones we think are more interesting. Then the ones that are very interesting, they go through a selection committee. And the selection committee is really tough. It's almost like a venture capital meetings that I've been on a lot. You're asking all the same questions because you want us to succeed and you want most of the companies coming in to actually exit successfully. That's going to build up the reputation. Then all the best people will want to come there. So you want to encourage really risk-taking research, but you also want them, if possible, to have a chance of succeeding. And by success, for us, it means getting to Series A and graduating and going on to expanding to larger space. So far, we've accepted somewhere around, it changes every day, but somewhere around 25, I think, 6 already in, and there are about 5 just moving in as we talk right now. It's quite a lot of work to onboard every company, and we have to try and onboard something like 30 or 40 companies within a year to try and achieve our financial goals. So the quality is excellent of the people coming in. Even without advertising, we have such a large pool applying that we can be very selective. And once we have the opening, the gala thing, and the word gets out on the media, I think it's actually we're going to be swamped. We're even now getting people from next month, it was going to be this month, people from the Consul General group of about 30 Consul Generals from San Francisco want to have a tour because they want to feed back to their countries how they might do something similar or get their companies from their countries coming in to the thing. So we're going to have a big international presence and visibility in this way.
Let me build off of some important points that Reg is making there. You asked about the selection process, the application process, and I just can't emphasize enough how important this experiment that UC Berkeley is doing is, because there's an opportunity that Berkeley is grabbing with both hands, which is we don't build an incubator and let the usual suspects show up at the front door. That's not all we do. Reg mentioned this recruitment element. There's something really important under that, which I think your listeners are going to appreciate. And that is when we look at the makeup of founders, when we think about tech founders, when we think about biotech, medtech, STEM, let's say, founders, your listeners can't see me, but they don't think of someone that looks like me. Your listeners can probably tell I identify as female. I'm mid-career. I'm an academic. I don't wear a hoodie. And I take pride in my personal hygiene. This is not someone that you might think of, right? And why is that? Something like 4%, actually, I think it's less, of STEM founders that are funded by VCs are women. What the heck is that? Sure, it's about equity and it's about inclusive opportunities for sure. And as an academic, as a mentor, as a champion, these are like core to my very being. A big part of what I do is mentor, is try to pass on my knowledge and learn at the same time. But there's something bigger, which is how many cures have we missed? How many life-saving or quality-enhancing technologies do we not have? Because we are excluding, for whatever reason, nearly, and I'll take the example of women, nearly half of this planet's population in terms of being, I won't use the word entrepreneurs, I will use the words problem solvers, change makers, to borrow from our Chief Innovation and Entrepreneurship Officer, Rich Lyons, people who really care about the future and know that they can make a difference, but for some reason don't feel welcomed and don't feel like these types of resources are for them. This is Berkeley's mission. I'm sure there's an equity component, and I don't want to underplay that, but that's one arm of what we're doing. The other arm is we desperately, as a species, need solutions to confront things like healthcare that is not available. The best treatments go to the top 1% of wage earners. What about that bottom 50%? Not just globally, but also within our own country. And seeing people I care about suffer through pediatric cancer, for example, a good friend of mine, and seeing what she went through to know that there's treatments available, but she just can't get them for whatever reason. And it has to do with the system. And thinking also about the aging population as well is another example. What capabilities do they not have? And we will be among them in just a couple of decades, for most of us, just a blip of time in terms of how long this planet has existed. What are they not able to contribute to society right now because either that treatment or that technology is not available to them, either in the US or globally? Just a couple of examples. I didn't even touch on the climate crisis and the impacts that has on this area of bioconvergence, but I will just say Berkeley is all in terms of experimenting, learning best practices, engaging widely to figure out how we can put the call out to problem solvers and change makers to say, this is a path that you can take if you choose to do so. And we're here for you if you do choose. And we'll twist your arm a little to try to get you to choose it. Just give it a try. And I think many of our Berkeley alumni will be hooked and UC alumni will be hooked. But I also just want to end that and say what we're building is not just for Berkeley. We haven't said that explicitly. Our doors are open, and they're open to any problem solver, any change maker who feels a calling to define their career path through making important contributions. We're here to help because we know that's a big risk, and we're here to share what we've learned as well.
I don't know if you read The Economist this week, but what it was saying that in India right now, in some of the clinics, 70% of the people coming in with bacterial infections are antibiotic resistant. A huge problem, particularly in Southeast Asia right now. Huge, huge problem. So one of the companies that we're starting is someone that says, what has happened? The big 20 big pharma companies. Now, currently, only 4 of them have antibiotic programs because people don't make money out of studying these things. So what we've brought in someone who's actually coming from Novartis, who's actually hoping to go back and try to develop ways of finding antibiotics that can get around this resistance thing. So yes, exactly. This is a global problem. It's just a particular example. Let me just say, though, in terms of Amy, one of the things that's been very encouraging for us, Naresh, is that the people who are applying and accepted into our program, so many of them are led by women. When we started doing this 12, 15 years ago, we thought about 5% of the people who were applying for fund were women. It's really getting so much better so quickly. On the other hand, ask me how many Latino or African American people are coming in to do it. 0 almost. It's nothing. So our big problem, just as Amy said, is they're not being addressed by entrepreneurship because they're not coming into our system.
It's on us. We know it's on us to do that outreach and to provide those resources.
Yeah, we are actually trying to work with this, looking what Massachusetts has done to try and do that. We're trying to emulate that. I'm working with Mark Tessier-Levine to try and put a statewide program in to try and deal with minorities and entrepreneurship. Because it usually turns out the problem, they have so much student debt, they can't afford to be entrepreneurs.
Reg, I'm so glad this is a priority for BBH. And this is a nice segue to talk about patient capital, especially in the deep tech space where it takes much longer for technology to go to the market. What are you doing to deploy patient capital, and how is the funding landscape changing in this space?
One of the things that's really blowing me away is how quickly the investment world is changing in this regard. One of the things that's a huge difference is that big philanthropies are getting involved in supporting entrepreneurship for the public good, or double bottom line entrepreneurship, vast amounts of money coming in. There's also a big change between what we call biotech investment and tech bio investment. They're coming from different sources, and our startups have to have 2 different pitch decks they do, depending on whether it's coming from tech bio or biotech. The thing is evolving so fast. Our goal is to try and make our tenants completely aware of the evolution that's taking place so fast in the venture and the funding world so they can take advantage of it. But it's a huge topic. Again, in The Economist this week, there's a new book that's come out discussing the evolution of the venture. I've just ordered it.
There's also, I'll take a kind of a twist on that, which is this patient capital. We may be thinking of capital as financial capital, but there's also intellectual and talent capital as well. And if we take that twist on it, thinking about our home here at BBH, and you can visit us at bbh.berkeley.edu, please do. What is BBH doing to ensure patiently that we build that intellectual and talent capital? And I'm just so thrilled to say, again, Berkeley is all in. We're starting up a new PhD fellowship program that's geared towards the final 2 years of PhD study for these problem solvers, for these change makers, to be able to not just support independence in their research, but to support their desire to maybe pivot or tact a little bit left or right in their main research directions, to start thinking and working on how can those directions set the foundation for directly impacting these existential problems that we've talked about in this bioconvergence area. So being able to support those 2 years of study financially, the campus is doing that, and we'll be launching that concurrent with the launch of BBH in May 2022 is our grand opening, COVID permitting. Also really investing in bringing faculty from different areas across the campus together to dissolve these silos of disciplines so that faculty can make connections with people they might not have met otherwise on a social level, so that you know someone who's working in wildfire prevention when you're a bioengineer, let's say, but also to spend focused time in a welcoming way to talk about and learn about some of these existential bioconvergence problems, and to really step back and think about how your academic research program as a principal investigator, as a PI, might be more directly aligned. And then the last thing with this patient, long-term intellectual and talent capital, besides the PhD fellowships and really stimulating interdisciplinary research between faculty on our campus to unleash some of these new ideas, is bringing in the next generation in an in-residence program that we'll be launching, a special space in the BBH called the Studio, to allow those graduate students, postdocs, undergrads, faculty to be able to have a home in BBH in the studio for a set period of time where they can lock up their prototypes and have meetings there without scheduling. They have their own area, secured area. They can keep their materials and count as a home, and also rub shoulders with the luminaries and the premier leaders in entrepreneurship and change making, and then also rub shoulders with our current founders and startups as well.
On the subject of incubation, like how long does a startup get to stay? Is it going to be more patient than other incubators, or what is the plan there?
There is a set period of in residence time. We don't want these startups to get too comfortable here, but we want to be able to provide the resources that they need and also help them transition, as hopefully many of them will, to much larger sites that are outside the incubator for sure. But it is a selection and review process that we're honing. So there is a pipeline to staying as long as you need, but not too long.
Fair enough, I guess. You don't want the startup staying back forever. So let's slightly shift gears and talk about the partnerships that you've been building both internally on campus and externally to support the startup companies.
Absolutely, Naresh. Excellent question. And I think this really gets to maybe one of the unique aspects of the Bakar Bioenginuity Hub. When this project was started, we were definitely focused on making this campus resource more than a startup incubator. And so you might ask why, and you might ask how. Of course, the heart of the Bakar Bioenginuity Hub is Bakar Labs. Reg has given us some great information and insight on that part of the organization. The other side of the coin for BBH is this focus on campus and really providing resources and a path for PhD students, postdocs, and others on the campus who have not yet even thought of forming a startup. So people who might not even consider themselves to be aspiring entrepreneurs, maybe they're problem solvers, they're, to use Rich Lyons' words, change makers. They just want to have an impact, a positive impact on society through the work and the research that they're doing now or through their careers. Or maybe they just want to work with a bunch of people who are really motivated and want to make a big difference in the world. So a part of that, looking beyond today's entrepreneurs, is looking to the future, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now. What are the technologies, the solutions that we're going to need to solve some of these really big problems at this bioconvergence interface, existential problems that are facing humanity? And that takes hardcore research in the research labs that many of us have worked in. It also takes people who are asked to think bigger or asking to think bigger about what today's training is going to build, not just for them and their careers, but also for the world. So we're launching a PhD fellowship program, which is just a shining star, I would say, example of thinking about the next generation. The fellowships are designed to fund the last 2 years of research for PhD students who are thinking about how could they take what they've done so far in terms of their research path and maybe move that over a little, nudge it a little bit over towards some of these big challenges that they might not have ever thought about trying to address with what they've discovered or invented. In addition to that, really bringing a community of those senior PhD students together so that they can learn from each other and hopefully for years to come act as a community that they can rely on and also help. And then also we're adding a service component to this as well. So allowing those cohorts of senior PhD students, not a lot of time, but some time to work together on projects that bring new knowledge to different communities. In addition to that, we have outreach through bioingenuity salons that we're designing now, COVID permitting, that will allow faculty and researchers from disparate disciplines to connect in the true sense of a salon, which I don't know if you know, I didn't know, but salons really gained interest in our history after major change events, kind of like COVID. It's a time for experts to share what they know about massive problems, ways that the world needs to change, and that others who aren't experts in that area to ask questions and maybe learn about how they can contribute. So trying to really dissolve some of the research silos that might be common at academic institutions.
The partnership with large industries is interesting. When I first started trying to do this with QB3, I found it wasn't actually very useful because the work we're doing takes 15 years to come into the bottom line of a company, and the CEOs will be well gone by then, so they're not so interested. So big partnerships with big pharma didn't work so much. However, big pharmas nowadays grow by acquiring smaller companies. What does QB3 do? It helps create those small companies. So the best partnership we found we could do was to focus not on working directly with big companies, but by trying to create startups, which they would love to acquire. So that became the basis of our partnership. What we've done with the Bakar Labs is set up several affiliation agreements, founder affiliates, with people in the industry, but also in the law firms and banking and venture capital, because we wanted to link to the whole of the biotech ecosystem. In order for any company to work here, you've got to have a finger in each part. You've got to know about real estate. You've got to know about financing. You've got to know about the competition. So you need to create this ecosystem. So what we've done with our affiliates is ask them if they were willing to give pro bono mentorship to all of our companies. And actually, we have a scientific advisory board, which also will give pro bono assistance to our companies. This is different. If we were a completely commercial incubator, then people wouldn't do it for us because we're making money. People are not going to give us things pro bono. But because we're a university associated one, we get tremendously high quality pro bono advice from people. So they will give mentorship to our tenants in our building. And we're also trying to put up with them. We want to try and create an ecosystem where people know each other, assuming the pandemic will be over sometime. And so the way we're doing that, and other incubators do that too, is to have social events. Every Friday, we'll have a Friday mixer where we have a talk followed by question and answer, followed by a socialization here. So what the people who are affiliates will provide speakers for those things to say, what things do you have to be careful to avoid? How can we best get ready for a Series A? So we'll have those talks with question and answers, and then the speakers and the tenants can get a chance to meet each other socially afterwards. We're actually going beyond that. We're telling their affiliates they can send several of their young people too to these events so that the young people, both in the startups and in the industry, in the support industry, can get to know each other based on the belief that really the way that biotech has flourished is when you have a cluster of people with overlapping interests who know each other, who can get on the phone and talk to each other. So it's creating a community is what we've been doing. So many of our partnerships have been involved in community building between our tenants and the Bay Area life science ecosystem.
Can you elaborate a bit more about what a typical pro bono advisory would look like? If you have one example, somebody from a biotech giving advice and how it worked out.
If you talk to people like Wilson Sonsini, who are one of our things, they will tell us how many people made a bad IP decision in their things and wrote up something really done, which makes it further on down the line, they cannot get anybody to fund them, right? It's just lots of good. They made an unfair decision, they can't use it. Also, sometimes we've heard when you get a partnership between a big company and a small one, sometimes that partnership can be written up. So the small company loses all its rights because the big companies have great lawyers. The startups don't have that access. So we can try and level the playing field in areas such as that.
I came across something called golden tickets on your website. What is that about?
Well, one of the things that is a nice way for people to find out what is going on in an area is to say, well, let's have a golden ticket award. Suppose you're a group that wants to support cancer research and maybe cancer on lung cancer. You say, well, we'll give you a year's free rent if you win the competition and you're working on lung cancer. So it's a gift to the company of rank. So we have a competition. You see, we run the competition. Say this is for a tenant who wants to be in our building, who's working on lung cancer. You can apply for it. The company and ourselves decides the winner, and the winner gets free rent. Lots of nice benefits from that. One, it's good for our tenants to get free rent, but also it's good for the companies. They get to look and see who's all doing things on lung cancer. And we're working together with the companies for mutual interest. What has been a very exciting extension of that is to work not with a company, but with a foundation. We've been working with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, who would like to promote work in gene modification because that's fundamental to try and correct the genetic defects in cystic fibrosis. So with them, this summer, we'll put out a golden ticket for companies working in the gene transfer area, genetic recombination area, which you wouldn't think maybe is immediately pertinent to cystic fibrosis, but they're willing to, not investing, but giving gifts to the companies to get a year's free rent. But what cystic fibrosis gets is a look at what's happening all over the world in this area that might be pertinent.
The latest and the greatest. Let's slightly shift gears and talk about intellectual property. Who owns the intellectual property at these startups? Historically speaking, IP ownership has been a pain point when it comes to setting up startups on campus. What is happening in that space?
We've been doing this incubator stuff since 2006 on the university campus over at San Francisco. And what we absolutely insisted from the beginning, we would not get involved with that if the university insisted on intellectual property rights. Then they shouldn't need to get it. This is a service contract. The startup is renting space from the university. That's a commercial interaction that doesn't come with any intellectual property rights. So we got them to agree with that, and UCSF to agree with it in 2006. And that's become the standard for almost every University of California incubator that's started since. It would never work. No one would ever come to a university incubator if the university took any of their intellectual property at all. So it's just a no-brainer. It just wasn't even up for discussion. If you won't do it with no IP, we're not involved.
Simple answer to your question, really important question, as always with you. But yeah, it's very simple. It's a startup. So the University of California and other universities have been, I think, really good recently at thinking about kind of what makes the most sense to get technologies and solutions out into the world. And at a place like Bakar Labs, an incubator for startups, that's one of maybe 3 categories that University of California has designated. And that category for IP is if you're a startup working in an incubator, including Bakar Labs, and you're working with your people and your know-how, it's your IP. I mean, no startup would ever move into an incubator where they had to relinquish some IP. Of course, if the startup decides, hey, they want to work with faculty or researchers on campus or use some, special capability on the campus, not the core facility, but something special, then of course that moves into, okay, who are the inventors? And just like in any scenario, if there's co-inventors from different institutions, then that's negotiated. But for those startups working in Bakar Labs, the IP goes to them.
I'm so glad this issue has been resolved. Here with DBH, it's been a pain point. I've been in this space and people talk about it all the time. A nice segue from that is, let us talk about competition, if I may call it. Biotech hubs are mostly known in the Massachusetts and the Bay Area. Looks like Massachusetts is ahead of us. What are the policy changes happening, if any, in California so we can be competitive with Massachusetts?
That's interesting. That's just what I was working on this morning before talking with you. Massachusetts, by putting in Massachusetts Life Sciences Center, which puts $100 million a year into the biotech industry in Massachusetts, has taken Massachusetts way ahead of California in several ways. One, for big companies looking around and seeing, Massachusetts legislature understands the need of life sciences industry, we're going to locate there instead of California. So they've done, just by showing that the state supports this industry, has helped a lot to attract the thing. What's been amazing, they're putting $100 million a year into it. They're making money out of this. Their return is a 1.5-fold return. What they've been able to do that's been so exciting there is to try and set up money to develop manufacturing facilities. Now, one of the nice things here
You really want to get startups in a university vicinity because that's where all the intellectual excitement is. But once you've got your company going and independent, you want to have a place where your land is cheap, you can expand, and houses are cheap for your workers. So then you tend to move out to Cambridge, Massachusetts, or the San Francisco Bay Area into other places. So this is the way you can use the strengths of these intellectual clusters to create jobs in places outside those clusters, and especially getting recession-proof manufacturing jobs in relatively low-income areas of the state. So Massachusetts did that beautifully. And of course, we would love to try and replicate that in California.
Is anything happening here that you know of that you can reveal or discuss?
We actually had a proposal, which I was collaborating with Mark Tessier-Levine, President of Stanford, and several other people, Jennifer Doudna, Corey Goodman. And we had a proposal to go on the governor's desk to try and start emulating that last year, called the California BioInvest Initiative, where the governor was fairly distracted last year with a pandemic and a recall election, so he didn't get his attention. We're currently trying actually to get a revised version on his desk before February the 18th.
Good luck with that. I really hope they come up with a $200 million a year kind of a budget.
What is so nice about what Massachusetts has taught us so much, for example, like they had internships for community college students to go to these companies and learn not just in science and technology, but go learn accounting and PR and human resources, because many of these companies, they're not all scientists. So it was actually a general way of creating jobs in many, many areas. They also, which I love and I'd love to emulate, for an entrepreneur in your first year, you're often living on family money, friend money, or your credit card. And that means you have to be moderately wealthy or have family that's wealthy. That means poor people, usually the underrepresented minorities, can't do it because they're paying off college debt. Then they can't even think about having a job that doesn't pay much for 2 years, and they don't have friends to do the original money. So what Massachusetts did, which was beautiful, was set up a loan fund, not a loan to the entrepreneurs, but to the company, so that the company could pay the salaries of the people in there. It was a way of letting people, underrepresented minorities, get in the entrepreneurial level, which is a huge problem. We don't have nearly enough minorities being CEOs of companies. So that's something we would love to emulate here in California as well.
That is wonderful. I really, really hope it works out here. Let's talk about success. Can you paint a picture of 20 years from now, 30 years from now, if everything goes according to what you wish? What would that success look like in terms of Baker Labs and larger California biotech in general?
This is a great one. I mean, it's something that I think for many of us who've been involved in building the Bakar Bioenginuity Hub over the last 4 years, the buildings, it's opening now. Startups are in Bakar Labs. Programs are starting at Bakar Bioenginuity Hub. But this has been a long running project because it's a pretty big deal, both infrastructure-wise, this amazing building that we're just honored to be living in during our work lives. And also the concept, it is a different concept than you typically see at a university. And so really working through that, okay, the place for the startups and the founders of today, that's Bakar Labs, that's our incubator. The place for the discoveries and innovations that are going to solve the problems of tomorrow, that's the campus, that's universities. Of course, Bakar Labs accepts startup applicants from anywhere. You do not have to be Berkeley associated or UC associated, but we understand the importance of fundamental research and deep science training for the C-suite of many of these startups. But for me, that success would really look like a couple of things. One, if I can look out and see alumni of Bakar Bioenginuity Hub who really can point back to BBH and Berkeley, because Berkeley is taking the step to do this, and say, it's because of that resource, that community, that my team and I were able to, succeed in bringing new solutions to the world through our startup, then that's a huge metric for success for sure. Even alumni, Bakar Labs and BBH, that maybe that startup didn't succeed, right? We know that a lot of early stage startups just aren't going to succeed for a bunch of reasons, but through that failure, learning happens, right? And those really driven, fearless founders who are starting these tiny, tiny companies, they know that, and they're going to keep driving in some way, serial founders in some cases, and in other ways decide to make contributions in different ways. But even for the startups that are in there today, if they fail, if they just don't make it to where those founders were working so hard to get, still, I mean, maybe even most importantly, for those founders to look back and say, it was because of Baker Labs, BBH, UC Berkeley, that we decided we could take that chance. We could make that leap. And we did it in a thoughtful, meaningful way that for us at the time made the most sense. Hey, it didn't work out, but now I know I can do it. And I did it. That would also be a huge metric of success. I guess two other things really quickly. One is if there are some successes that we can see that are changing the world, as you said, 20 years from now that had their kind of glimmer of nascent start at BBH, that would be phenomenal for sure. A couple of examples or many of those. And then from the perspective maybe of a faculty member, if this resource is so successful that we're able to bring resources back to the campus, which is our number one goal. So Bakar Bioenginuity Hub is designed to be self-sustaining, but success, especially financial from the operations, go back into the campus after covering operations. If that is able to spark, a whole suite of graduate fellowships, if that is able to spark new programming that helps PhD students, postdocs, faculty take a chance in some way through their research, that to me would just be the legacy that I would love to honor. I would love to see.
Let me just give my own particular ambitions, like what drives me on this. One of the things what got me going on this is the feeling that universities in general were too entitled. We're taking from the government and not giving back adequately. They were not obeying the social contract. Then they were being a little bit arrogant in dealing with industry. We are Berkeley, we are Stanford, and so on. An indication which validates, I think, that vision is the big groups we've seen, like Altos, Arcadia, Calico, and something, large amounts of money going into companies that are pursuing research and not putting those money into the universities the way they do them, because companies can use money much more efficiently. And these companies are not set up to make money because the philanthropists are rich. They're really using entrepreneurship for the public good. So the money is going into those things like Altos, Arcadia, which are companies which are doing basic research. My feeling is if universities are going to might lose their position in general in this important aspect of the research community, unless we look at what we're doing and doing it better. And from my point of view, that's what the Bakar Labs are. This is a major university with a huge reputation, making a real commitment to having on its campus people doing entrepreneurship in order for the public good. Berkeley doesn't make any money out of them being they're successful entrepreneurs, but they're doing it for the public good. So I see Berkeley and the Bakar Labs as an evolution of the same idea, that universities are not doing an efficient enough job turning their research into benefits for society. My ambition here is, of course, to make Berkeley such a good example that is copied all over the world. I'm not trying to just make Berkeley the best place. I want Berkeley to be the model, because if Berkeley can do this well, it'll be picked up all over the United States and perhaps all over the world as a model how universities can continue to do fantastic basic research, but realize that they have some obligation to think how that research can be used for the benefit of society.
I completely agree with you, Reg. Academic research benefit in the society is one of the goals of this podcast, and thank you for reiterating that point. And on to the closing question. Any message to the audience from both of you?
Come here. We want to have an open front door. We have an open front door. The building itself is remarkable. So you will not have wasted time by spending a little bit of time. What I would say is a work of art. It is an unforgettable space. If you don't consider yourself to be an entrepreneur, come anyway. If you consider yourself to be a problem solver or change maker, or just curious about what's going on and how to learn about different ways for your career to have an impact, your life to have an impact through your work, join us. Come to some events, stop by, come in for a tour, stop by for coffee. We firmly believe that some of the biggest problems that are facing humanity are not being solved because many individuals don't see themselves as entrepreneurs, and we need you to tackle these problems.
Every time you're the first person to do something, it's always difficult. And to make a university-operated incubator on university land where there's no models, you're bound to run into problems. Because here, what are you doing? You're bringing a not-profit public service entity, and it's a state institution, so you have all of the union rules and all the stuff that comes with being at Berkeley. And then you've got the startups, which have got to be commercial. They've got to make money. They've got to be nimble, fast. They've got to look at the competition. It's a very, very different style of doing things. So you've got two different cultures coming together. Semi-bureaucratic, actually, it is quite very bureaucratic, the cultures of universities. And they're very much nimble, free-floating, risk-taking cultures of startups. You get a cultural clash there. So there are cultural conflicts that we have to work through. If it was easy, everyone could do it. It's not easy. We have to work through these things. I am hoping, Naresh, to be honest, that this will help to loosen up administrative structures. It's only when you try to use that structure for something different, you say, well, do we really need to do it that way, or that's just the way we've always done it?
You bring up some very important points here, Reg. I believe that bureaucracies and cultural clashes are a problem at most academic institutions, and hope everyone is paying attention to the developments here at Berkeley to see how they can learn from the experiment here. Well, Amy, Reg, thank you both for sharing the story behind the Bakar Bioenginuity Hub and Bakar Labs. A total blast for me to hear from two of the trailblazers in building the biotech startup ecosystem at Berkeley and in California in general. You're building some phenomenal opportunities for the entrepreneurs. I'm so appreciative of your time, and good luck with all your endeavors, and wish you great success.
My pleasure. Take care, Naresh.
Thank you. Thank you for featuring us. And just a big congratulations to the many, many people who've been part of building this. And we just look forward to where this generation is gonna make use of it, and what they're gonna do, how they're gonna change the world.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Lab to Startup podcast. You can find links to the resources and programs mentioned in these episodes, connect with Naresh, or subscribe to this show at labtostartup.com.